in today's video, I want to start a new series which is called How I Get the Shot. And basically, I want to pick one photo that had an interesting process in getting captured or being edited and explain my thought process and what gear I use to be able to get that photo, and also share with you my editing workflow in Lightroom and Photoshop to show you how I got to the final image. So the photo we're going to be talking about today is right behind me here, and I shot this while Dan and I were visiting Poznan, Poland to do a whole bunch of photo shoots there. So first of all, one of the questions that I get asked quite often is how do you get models when you're traveling overseas? So as you guys know, we live in Sydney, Australia. So doing these photo shoots in Poznan meant that I had to get in contact with a brand new agency to be able to book some models. So what I do is just some research before I go to a new country, and I Google what kind of modeling agencies they have there and pick kind of my top 2 or 3 favorite agencies that I'm going to get in contact with. Once I'm in that country, I call them up, introduce myself, and then email through my portfolio to see if they want to do some photo shoots with me. In this instance, I ended up booking Martinica, who is the model for this photo shoot from Gaga Models. Evie doesn't like talking about photography. She yawned again. So this photo shoot, as you can see, was shot in a park, and the park had some really beautiful trees that we don't get much of in Australia. So I wanted to make sure that I could get some really beautiful bokeh from them in the background. So my camera gear for this photo shoot was my Canon 5D Mark III and my Canon 35mm 1.4 Mark I lens. And I chose the 35mm instead of the 50mm because I wanted something a little bit wider to make sure I could get in as much of that background as possible. So in terms of getting the actual shot, we did quite a few different looks and used a few different locations throughout the entire photo shoot. If you want to watch that photo shoot in full, I'll leave the link for that in the description below for you guys. It was a really fun photo shoot, and I'm so happy with all the photos that we took that day. But for this photo in particular, I was after getting a really nice sitting down shot with really nice backlight on the model in the frame. In the park, there were lots and lots of really big trees and heaps of dappled sunlight on the ground. So I asked the model to sit down in one of those patches of sunlight so we could get some really nice backlight. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to do a photo shoot or just take photos in a different country, but you'll often notice that the lighting can work completely differently to what you're used to at home. So when I got the model to sit down, the shot wasn't quite working as well as I was hoping to. There wasn't enough light reflecting back onto the model, so some of the shots that we were getting were looking really dark. So I actually asked the model to move around a little bit until we found the perfect lighting to shoot in, which was this little setup here. So what wasn't working before was that I was only finding a little patch of sunlight enough to have some backlight on the model, and I wasn't keeping in mind that we needed some extra sunlight like in front of the model and behind me to kind of bounce back in her face, and that's why those initial photos were coming out really dark. So in the spot that we ended up with, it was actually a much larger patch of sunlight, so there was more light kind of reflecting on the model's face, and I could expose it a little more evenly to also be able to see some more details in the background. And last but not least, while getting the shot, I did underexpose my model's face just a little bit so the background wouldn't be completely overexposed. And we're gonna jump into Lightroom right now, and I'm gonna show you guys the rest of the process of getting this final image. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom. This is the raw image straight out of the camera. As you can see, because we were shooting in a park, there is a really defined green cast on the model's skin tone, which we're going to fix up a little bit in Lightroom and then do a little bit more work in Photoshop to make it look as natural as possible. So for the final image, I edited it with my disposable film Lightroom preset, so we're just going to apply that. Normally, if the photo isn't this green in a park, it looks a lot better with a one-click edit, but for this image in particular, we have to do a little bit more work to get it to look right. So the first thing I want to do is play around with the tint to try and get rid of as much of this green on the model's skin as possible. So I'm just going to pull that up until I'm happy with what the results are looking like. So I think just about there it's looking a little bit more natural. And I'm also going to warm up the image as well, as it's looking a little bit cold. Perfect. So next thing I want is to bring back some of the detail here in the background. So I'll do that by bringing down the highlights, which is the most exposed or most overexposed parts of the image. That's what it's going to save. So I think I'll just bring it right down to the bottom and save as much of that as possible. The next thing I want to work on is, again, some of this green cast. So in the split toning, my preset is set to the greens in the shadows. I actually want to move that here into the orangey red section just to warm it up overall. And I think just doing that already has made such an amazing difference. So here's a little before and after so far. The next thing I want to do is use an adjustment brush just to bring a little bit more light into our model's face and into like her arm area here and her legs here that were kind of in the shadows of the image. So I'm going to reset that and just bring the exposure up by 0.20, I think is enough. And I also want to bring up the shadows a little bit and add a little bit more pink into the tint. So this image is looking almost ready for Photoshop. I just want to bring the exposure down a little bit because I prefer my images to look a little bit darker rather than brighter. It's just a personal preference of mine. And once we've brought down the exposure, I just want to jump into our adjustment brush once again. That's the adjusted sections, the parts in red. You can use the shortcut O to see where you've brushed with an adjustment brush. And I just want to bring up the exposure just a little bit more so the image is really balanced out. Okay, so I think that is ready for Photoshop now. Let's open up the image. Okay, so here we are now in Photoshop CC 2018, and the first thing I like to do before I start working on any image is to duplicate the background layer by hitting Command J. And this basically just makes an exact copy of your background layer just so you don't do any edits to the original image. So I like to start off with the face first of all, and I'm just going to zoom in and create a new blank layer by hitting Command Shift N and enter. And we're going to use the stamp tool to kind of clean up around the eyes a little bit here and just kind of brighten up her face in general. So I like to use shortcuts while editing in Photoshop and Lightroom, so I'll just talk you guys through what shortcuts I'm using for the tools. For the stamp tool, I like to hit S, and we're going to use a nice big soft brush. So you can see the brush that we're using here. I'm going to keep the opacity on 30 and have the sample on all layers. Normally I like to edit with a frequency separation technique, but for this image we're just going to keep it really simple, as I want to share with you guys just different ways that there are of editing images. So with the stamp tool, I'm selecting in the lighter parts of the face and brushing over the shadows here under her eyes. I like to make sure that I'm constantly sampling new sections of skin so we don't get to see a really defined kind of like copy and paste looking texture. And just keep it looking as natural as possible. Alright, so I think that is looking pretty good. Once I've done my initial stamping, I like to bring down the opacity of the layer to help it blend in with the original image. So I think just about there, it's like the shadows are cleaned up, but you can't really tell that we've stamped too much, so I think that looks really nice. I'll just show you a before and after of that. Perfect, and now we're going to go ahead and do the other eye as well. Something that comes in really handy when you're retouching is to constantly zoom in and out of your picture to see if what you're doing is looking okay or if it's looking like you're doing a bit too much. So I like to zoom in when I'm stamping or using the healing brush tool just so I can see all the details and not miss out on anything. And then I like to zoom out while I'm retouching or when I'm finished just to check that it's looking good. So let's bring down the opacity on that layer. Perfect. And we're gonna just clean up the shadows around her mouth as well. So I like to make a brand new layer for every section of the face that I edit. And this basically makes it easier in case I'm finished with the image and I notice that maybe I don't like the retouching on the right eye as much as the left eye, so I can easily just delete that layer instead of having to create a layer mask and manually get rid of it so I can redo it. I feel like it makes it easier for yourself in the long run just to make new layers. It also doesn't cost anything, so you may as well. Okay, let's bring down the opacity of that. I think just about there is perfect. Okay, so the next thing that I want to tackle in this image is the green cast on her skin that was caused by shooting in a really vibrantly green park. So all the grass that she's sitting on is reflecting back on her skin. So I'm going to start by editing this leg section, which I feel like is the most vibrant green of all. So I'm going to make a brand new layer by hitting Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to change the layer blending mode to color. The next thing I'm going to do is use my brush tool by hitting the shortcut B, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And by holding Alt, I'm going to select a section of skin that doesn't have the green color cast on it. So since we're doing the leg, I want to try and select a color from around here. And then with the opacity on 20 and a nice soft brush that doesn't have any hard edges, we're going to start painting over the leg and see if that helps. Yeah, so that's already making a massive difference. So we did one layer of like a normal color without the green, and in this section it's still kind of really vibrant, so I'm just going to keep going over that until we can completely get rid of that green. Once again, I like to zoom out while I'm doing this just to make sure it's not looking too crazy. But I think just about there is good. Let's bring down the opacity as well, just again to blend it in. We do want to color correct the green, but it will also look weird if it completely disappears as she is in that environment in the photo. So bringing down the opacity of layers is always super important to keep your retouching really minimal and keep it looking natural. So I think that looks good. Let's move on to this arm area here. So once again, let's make a new layer and just start painting over, let's change the blending mode to color first. And we'll start painting over all those green sections. Perfect. We'll do a little bit of the leg here as well. Okay, that's looking good. I want to bring down the opacity just a tiny bit for this one because I really like the way it looked at 100%. So we'll keep it around in the 80s. Awesome. Okay, now another new layer, and with a bigger brush I'm going to paint over this without even zooming in just to see what it looks like on the picture as a whole. Let's just change that to color. I keep forgetting to do that. So let me bring down the opacity of that. There we go. Okay, last but not least, we're going to work on the face. I'm actually going to select a new color as the face is a little bit warmer than the rest of her body. So let's try here on the forehead. And we'll just start painting in the extra green areas. Let's zoom out and we'll bring down the opacity of that. Awesome, that's made a little bit of a difference in the face, but the green cast was more prominent on her arms and legs than it was on her face. And here we have the final image. Sometimes I don't like to do too much editing to a photo. As you saw, we did the bare minimum retouching and just a little bit of color correction, but that's sometimes all you need to edit a photo. I'll just show you guys a final before and after. And there you have it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of these how I got the shot videos, please let me know what photo you would like me to talk about next, as I would love to make some more of them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye!